For centuries, Rome stood as the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Its armies were unstoppable, its cities were magnificent, and its influence stretched across continents. So, how did it all collapse? How did an empire that ruled millions, built incredible roads, and dominated Europe for centuries, simply fall apart? This is the story of the fall of the Roman Empire. To understand Rome's collapse, we must first understand its greatness. At its peak, the Roman Empire controlled vast territories across Europe, North Africa, and parts of the Middle East. It was not just powerful, it was organized. Roads connected distant lands, laws created order, and the Roman army enforced control with unmatched discipline. Rome wasn't just a city, it was a system. But even the strongest systems can begin to crack. One of the biggest problems Rome faced was its sheer size. As the empire expanded, it became harder to control. Communication was slow. Orders from the capital could take weeks or even months to reach distant provinces. Local leaders began gaining more power, and loyalty to Rome started to weaken. Managing such a massive empire became increasingly difficult. Then came political instability. In its early days, Rome had strong leadership, but over time, power became something to fight over. Emperors were no longer chosen for their ability. They were often forced into power by the military or political groups. Assassinations became common. In a period known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century, Rome saw dozens of emperors rise and fall in a very short time. Some ruled for only a few months before being overthrown or killed. This constant struggle for power weakened the empire from within. At the same time, the economy began to suffer. Rome relied heavily on conquest. As long as it kept expanding, it brought in wealth, slaves, and resources. But when expansion slowed down, so did the flow of wealth. Taxes increased, inflation grew, trade declined. Many citizens struggled to survive, and the gap between the rich and the poor became wider than ever. People began losing faith in the system. And then there was the military. The Roman army was once the greatest fighting force in the world. But over time, it began to change. Recruiting Roman citizens became harder, so the empire started relying more on foreign soldiers, many of whom had weaker loyalty to Rome. Some soldiers were more loyal to their generals than to the empire itself. This created dangerous divisions within the military. Meanwhile, threats from outside the empire were growing stronger. Groups often referred to as barbarians by the Romans, such as the Goths and Vandals, began pressing against the borders. These were not just small raids anymore. They were large, organized invasions. Rome was no longer expanding, it was defending. In an attempt to manage these growing problems, the empire was divided into two parts: the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. At first, this seemed like a smart decision. The eastern half, with its capital in Constantinople, became wealthy and stable. But the western half, centered around Rome, struggled. It faced more invasions, weaker leadership, and deeper economic problems. Over time, the gap between the two halves grew wider. The Western Roman Empire became increasingly fragile. Then came one of the most symbolic moments in history. In the year 410, the city of Rome was sacked by the Visigoths. For the first time in nearly 800 years, the city had fallen to an enemy. It shocked the entire world. Rome, the eternal city, was no longer untouchable. But this was only the beginning. Over the next decades, invasions continued. The empire grew weaker and weaker. Finally, in the year 476, the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was removed from power. This moment is often considered the official end of the Western Roman Empire. But the truth is, Rome didn't fall in a single day. It collapsed slowly, over centuries. It was not one event, but many. Political chaos, economic decline, military weakness, and constant external pressure. All of these factors combined to bring down one of the greatest empires in history. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire continued to survive for nearly another 1,000 years. Today, we often call it the Byzantine Empire. But the fall of the Western Roman Empire remains one of the most important turning points in history. It marked the end of ancient Rome and the beginning of a new era in Europe, the Middle Ages. So, what can we learn from Rome's fall? Perhaps the most important lesson is this: no empire, no matter how powerful, is immune to collapse. Strength alone is not enough. Without stability, unity, and strong leadership, even the greatest civilizations can fall. Rome was not destroyed overnight. It weakened, slowly and quietly, until it could no longer hold itself together. And by the time the final blow came, it was already too late. The story of Rome is not just history. It is a warning.